There's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door. Open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory.
All right, here we go. Open up the door. Starts right now. So fling wide you heavenly gates and prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ. And he heard a sound behind him, and he said, Behold, I looked. There was a door standing open in heaven, and I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, Come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us, the things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now. That is what this broadcast is all about, discussing issues of the day, discerning the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and world view. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, everybody, all across the fruited plain. Oh, Andy, why here? What you are about to hear is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Open Up the Doors. Hey, I am streaming live over on my Facebook page over at facebook.com/faithfm91.7. That's the Open Up the Doors Facebook page. If you'd like to join in the conversation over there, let me know where you are watching from. Do a big meet and greet over there. And we're going to have a great broadcast today. I'm anticipating. I got a guest on with me. I'll be introducing you to him in just a minute or so. But listen, if you've never liked my Open Up the Doors Facebook page, please go over there, like the page, join in the family, in the fellowship. Also, you can follow me on Truth Social at AJ White. That's Truth Social at AJ White. And if you are outside of the Faith FM broadcast area, download the Faith FM app. It's a great resource to have. You can listen to Faith FM 24/7 here from the east end of Long Island. We have the app for the Android platforms, for the Apple platforms. Get the app at your relative related app store. Look up Faith FM in Sag Harbor, because there are other Faith FMs around the country. If you'd like to email me, you can email me at ajwhite777@icloud.com. That's ajwhite777 at icloud.com. All right, I think that covers my preliminaries, and I'm really excited to get to my guest today. Man, this is just going to be an exciting discussion. Let me just give you a little bit of background about John Holler. John is an elder and a Bible teacher at Fellowship Bible Chapel in Columbus, Ohio. He's also a conference speaker, and he puts out a weekly prophecy update every Sunday from his church, which you can catch via YouTube. And John, are you there?
I am.
Good.
Glad to be here, Andy.
Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining in. I appreciate it so much. You are in Columbus, Ohio, right?
Yeah, the church is actually located out in the country in a little town called Sunbury, Ohio.
Oh, okay, right.
We're about 35 miles, 35-minute drive from downtown Columbus.
Are they still calling
it? We're in the general area.
Are they still calling it Columbus these days?
Yeah, but there are a lot of people that aren't too happy about that. The woke crowd has kind of. I don't know. I left my law firm last year, and really since the pandemic have not been downtown that much. And I don't remember if they tore down the Columbus statue or not. I'd have to go down and check. But
they tried. There
was at one point there was somebody wanted to put out a giant Columbus statue that was like larger, maybe I think twice the height of the Statue of Liberty in New York, and they wanted to give it to the city, but I think that was refused. It certainly would be refused now. We have a very woke mayor. Columbus is very woke and many respects.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering. So listen, let me start here. About 5 years ago, the world was introduced to the AI robot Sophia, and she spoke at the UN. She spoke at the World Economic Forum. The Saudi government made her an honorary citizen, and here I am calling this stupid robot a she. It's mind-boggling. It's a machine, but 5 years later,
But the machine identifies as female.
right? Yes, yes. We got to respect what it identifies at, I suppose. But 5 years down the road, I think the evolution of Sophia and AI, in particular, has grown exponentially, and that's what I'd like to really begin to hit upon in this interview today with you, because I know you have every week on your prophecy update. You know, you go through a whole smorgasbord of different topics, but you keep up on this issue more so than I have. You know, it was a big deal 5 years ago, and I tend to do what's currently in the news a lot more so than what's in the mainstream news and cultural things. So I've kind of let this slip away a little bit from my audience here. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it today. So where do you think this is going? Obviously, like I said, it's grown exponentially. But give us a little bit of insight of just how far this is going.
Yeah, well, let me just back up and sort of explain to people that may not. I'm sure there are a lot of people that are not familiar with me. Sort of the framework through which I look at events that are in the scriptures that talk about Bible prophecy. And one of the things you learn, I think, early on in this, and I've been doing this for 25 years, and it used to be, Andy, that I would take 5 or 10 minutes to talk about things that I thought were significant about Bible prophecy. Now I sort of artificially cut things off, like this past Sunday when I talked about AI, artificial intelligence. I went almost 2 hours, and most of that was about that. And part of that is related to how I think this prophecy pattern is going to unfold in the end times. And I do think we are in the end times. And so Jewish prophecy is patterned. So you will see, you will talk to Jewish rabbis in Israel, and they will talk about the pattern in Genesis will be unfolded in the end times, like particularly with the reconciliation that occurred at the tomb of Abraham at Machpelah in Hebron, that at the burial of Isaac, Jacob and Esau had a reconciliation of sorts. And so we know that, you know, there's this conflict between the descendants of Esau and the descendants of Jacob today. And the belief is that someday there will be this reconciliation because the pattern is there in Genesis. We know the pattern of the suffering servant of Joseph is a pattern for the Messiah's ministry, at least part of it. So, but one of the patterns in Jewish prophecy relates to the first coming of Jesus and the second coming of Jesus. And at the time of the first coming of Jesus, there were many, many prophecies. And these, you know, we had a 400-year period of silence where there was nothing added to the canon of Scripture. Then the prophecies started sort of slowly being fulfilled. You know, we have the story of John the Baptist and his father, the conception of John the Baptist and Jesus and that sort of thing in the Gospels. And there were many prophecies fulfilled during Jesus' life, but when you analyze them in numbers, what you find is that of the prophecies fulfilled at the first coming of Jesus, about 60% of them were fulfilled in the last week. So we're in that last week period, that week of Passover and first fruits and that type of thing. So it's interesting that we're doing this today when this is actually occurring. But so if the pattern was that there would be this almost exponential increase of fulfilled prophecies related to the first coming of Messiah at his first coming, we should expect the same thing as at the time of the second coming, that there will be maybe a little bit of a linear progression. And some of the articles are videos I was looking at today regarding the financial situation in the world talk about, we think that there's certain things that are going to happen. And the one guy was talking on a podcast I listened to just a few minutes ago that everything has been linear, but now all of a sudden it's exponential and seemingly chaotic. So I think that that's the way this is going to go as we get closer to the return of the Lord. And I think we're at that time where things are really going to take off exponentially. So with regard to artificial intelligence, this has been around for a while. I think there was a paper that was written back in 1955 or 56 at Dartmouth, and they were talking about, we're going to do an artificial intelligence study here this summer, and we're going to try to do this. Well, here we are. So what are we, 60, from 1955, we're 68 years later, and things have progressed over time, but now all of a sudden we're at this where the curve goes almost straight up in terms of what's happening. So I was in Israel in December. I had gotten invited to the Christian Media Summit that's put on by the Israeli government, the government press office. They had a speaker there. I played a clip of it this past Sunday, a guy named Jonathan Medved, who's a venture capitalist, probably a pretty wealthy guy. And he's gung-ho, Israel technology, innovation nation, where we've got all this technology and that type of thing. And during the course of his talk, I'm sitting there at the hotel there in Jerusalem in the big ballroom where they were holding this.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, have you heard about ChatGPT-4? And I had not heard of it. Now, this was about December 11th or 12th. It had rolled out on November 30th. And in the first week, it was the fastest download app. The downloads reached 1 million more quickly with regard to this particular app than any other app that's ever been put out. And from 1 million around the 10th of December, it grew within a month to, I think, over 130 million. And that was ChatGPT-4. And
Right.
ChatGPT-4 is known as generative artificial intelligence. It's sort of they say it's a text and language-based system, that it looks at all of the text out there. And it was able to do pretty amazing things. I know people were saying, prepare a paper on this. Jordan Peterson had some comments that he made in mid-December about this in one of his podcasts or one of his talks.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about the fact I gave it a pretty difficult thing to do, and it came back like it was sort of, give me something about the Beatitude, Jesus' statements in the Beatitudes in the style, but put it in the style of somebody who's familiar with this Chinese philosophy. I don't even remember the names. And he said it did an amazing job. It came back with like a 5-page paper that was pretty good, but it did it in 3 seconds.
Right.
So a lot of people have been using it. I've seen some. I personally have not used it. I'm reading articles about it. I just have some concerns about it. I put a disclaimer on my prophecy update now that generative artificial intelligence has not been used in the research or preparation of this updates, because it's still all me. I haven't, and I'm not so critical of people that are using it, because it's a tool that's out there.
Right.
So that was November 30th. Now that was ChatGPT-4. So there was, ChatGPT 3 and 3.5, and then they came out with 4. But now they've rolled out GPT-4, which is probably, by most estimates, 100 times more powerful than ChatGPT-4 had been. So GPT-4 has been rolled out. Companies like Microsoft has made a $10 billion investment.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this centers around a company called OpenAI, Open
Right.
Artificial Intelligence,
Yeah, I'm glad
founded by Elon Musk and Sam Altman. Now, Musk has left the company a few years ago, maybe more, because he was concerned that it was becoming very much profit-oriented, and he he did not like that. And even Musk has used the term when talking about artificial intelligence that it seems if we're summoning demons.
Yeah, he's been like sitting on. He's been trying to play. It seems to me almost both sides of the fence with it because he was warning about it years ago. And last week he came out with him and a bunch of guys and signed some kind of paper telling the world they need to slow down with it. Yet he was one of the official, not official, but one of the initial, I should say, inventors of it, pushing it. And yet he's also at the same time saying how dangerous it could be,
Right. And yeah, so GPT-4 rolled out, recently, and last week, I think it's been signed by about 3,000 scientists and tech leadership people like Elon Musk, like this guy I've talked a lot about, this guy named Yuval Noah Harari, who is a professor of medieval history, but has been, I think, rightly described in many respects as sort of the false prophet of the World Economic Forum in terms of what they want to do. But what they said was we need a 6-month moratorium. Now, in response to that, and their concern was it's going too fast. We don't know how we can control it. We don't know what it's going to do. We have concerns that it's gone too fast. So first, let me just say what GPT-4 has been able to do. So there was, I can't remember the paper, the website, or the group. They did a study and looked at the performance benchmarks of GPT-4. ChatGPT, they had given it the task of taking certain exams. So a lot of college kids started using ChatGPT to write papers and that type of thing. Then there became a big concern was, well, is that plagiarism? Are they really learning? And how do we do this? And so there was a number of programs that came out and said, well, use our program, buy our program, and you'll be able to determine whether the students are improperly using ChatGPT-4 to write papers.
Mm-hmm.
But then studies of those companies came out and said all of those companies are making essentially false claims. You can't tell. And it's very easy to tweak the results from GPT-4 to just change a few words here and there so that it looks like your original writing. So there's a big concern about the effect on education. Then they will also start giving ChatGPT-4 various professional tests like bar exam,
right,
test, LSAT, law school admission test, and that type of thing. Well, now they come out with GPT-4, and the numbers from GPT-4 are rather stunning. For example, on bar exams, like state bar exams that lawyers have to take to get a license to practice law, the corpus, or the body of information that GPT-4 draws from, by most estimates, about 100 times more powerful than GPT-4. And this, by the way, understand, this just happened in 3 months.
Yep.
I mean,
yep.
ChatGPT-4 was really rolled out to the world in large respects at the World Economic Forum in Davos in mid-January. That's when there are a lot of sessions there that we're talking about GPT-4 or ChatGPT and how it was going to be great and that type of thing. And so now here we are 10 weeks later, and we have this tool that's 100 times more powerful.
Let me tell you, I've been struggling personally over these last several months with the temptation of trying it myself. I haven't. It's almost like I feel like I'm kind of staring at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and I'm saying to myself, I've been resisting the temptation because there's something about it that, like you said a moment ago, it's a tool, right? And a tool can be good, can be used for obviously good or evil. So I've been actually struggling with myself. I've been resisting because I'm wondering, is it a mousetrap? I remember talking to you. I think it was last week. We chatted a little bit, and you had mentioned some pastors that had used it, and and you had said that they had said to you was like swerving into the demonic, and I thought that was a really good way of putting it. So I haven't tried it. I've been battling with it, but it's got a strange. Not I shouldn't even say strange, but there's a natural curiosity. I mean, when Adam and Eve looked at when Eve looked at the tree, it says, and she saw it was good for making one knowledgeable, for making one wise. And there's a God-given instinct in us to want to have knowledge, to want to be wise. It's part of the things God's put in us. But again,
right.
do you do that? Do you do that by way of, you know what I'm saying? There's a proper and improper way of gaining knowledge and wisdom. Is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and so I've known of pastors. I've heard them say, I went to ChatGPT 4 and I asked it to prepare a sermon on John 3:16. And one pastor who did this, and I'm not being critical of them for doing this and investigating it on a deeper level than I have, but the pastor came back with the response was, the sermon that it came up with was probably better than most of the sermons that you would get in the average evangelical church on John 3:16. Now, that's the problem that too is, though, that if somebody just relies on that, it's sort of like downloading somebody else's sermon. I don't have a problem with people looking at other sermons and using that as kind of a outline basis, but you need to do your own work to vet the information in that. But the problem is that they don't. But I've also had some pastors who told me that they played around with it, and then they got into the place where, it almost seems demonic. And so there's a guy who's been involved in this whole process. His name is Eliezer Ludowski, and he's kind of I would say he's eccentric. You might see him in an interview, and his facial expressions don't necessarily match the tone of the subject that he's talking about. But he was a big guy. He works with, I think he's director of the, Office of Machine Intelligence or Company of Machine Intelligence. But he was also one of the guys who, with Ray Kurzweil, helped develop the Singularity Institute. Now, Kurzweil has sort of taken that knowledge base and moved to Google. And so now Google's coming out with their own version of GPT called, I think it's called Bard. And it has some issues, and they're sort of rolling this out. And I think the concern is that they're making a lot of it available to the general public maybe too quickly. So in response to the open letter of Musk and Harari and Steve Wozniak, who was one of the co-founders of Apple, about doing a moratorium, Eliezer Ludowski came out and did a article in Time magazine last week, and he said, no. He also did an interview with a guy named Lex Friedman, I know, Fridman. And Lex does these very long-form interviews. So like in the last week, he's done like a 2.5-hour interview with Sam Altman, who is the co-founder of OpenAI and now the CEO of OpenAI. And he did about a 3-hour and 15-minute interview with Eliezer Ludowski on March 30th. So I guess that was a week ago today. And Eliezer says, listen, we don't need a moratorium. We need to stop. We need to just stop this right now. We don't know where this is going. He said, listen, when these things come out, we don't really know how good they are. And it's not a situation with what these things can do now in terms of writing computer code and generating things. And so we're at the stage now where we've gone from generative intelligence to artificial general intelligence, which is a big step. And we're sort of like right on the cusp of that. So Eliezer Ludowski says, stop it. Just stop. And if the countries of the world, they need to enter into treaties and agreements that they're not going to go forward with this. And if they don't stop and they continue to do it, we need to do airstrikes on their hardware computer facilities and destroy them.
That's pretty radical.
He says because if he says, you know, and Sam Altman in interviews has said, well, maybe there's a 10% chance. He did an interview with ABC about 2 weeks ago, and during that he said, well, yeah, you know, she says, well, you say that you think everything will be okay, but that doesn't sound reassuring with something like this. And he goes, well, if it gets out of control, we'll slow it down. Not stop it, we'll slow it down. And Ludowski comes out and says, no, we have to shut it down now, because if we get it wrong, it's not like we can correct it. We're at the stage where if we don't get it right, all of humanity will die. So last Thursday, after that interview came out, and I think his article in Time magazine was on March 29th, where he said, stop it and do airstrikes on facilities if they don't. The next day, there was Peter Doocy from Fox News was asking questions of Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary. And he said, what do you think about this? He says, all humanity will die. In the room, it was very funny to watch the reaction of the press people in that room. As Peter asked, I think what was a very serious, well-thought, and important question. And the press secretary's reaction was, oh, Peter, you're so dramatic in your delivery. You know, all humanity will die. Now, it's interesting that the press secretary who said that, remember, it was, 2 weeks ago that the International Panel on Climate Change came out with their most recent report. And in that most recent report, they said humanity's going to die by 2050. And nobody laughed at anybody who was asking questions about that.
So
the same people who just accepted that, when we have this other thing that's maybe because it's a little bit more mysterious to them, we don't understand exactly how it's working, they just sort of laugh it off. So is the laughing off, is it a nervous reaction? They don't know what else to do? Or is it that they just think that people like Ludowski and Peter Doocy and myself, who have very big concerns about this and how this plays into our own version of what we think is going to happen as we get closer to the Lord's return, you know, are they just mocking us, or they just don't know how to respond? And I think it's probably a combination too. But they'll accept the International Panel on Climate Change report as gospel, but when somebody else comes out with something that is maybe likely more serious in terms of its implications for humanity, they just kind of laugh it off. And these are the people that are in charge and you're always telling us that we're kind of stupid.
You keep mentioning this guy Ludowski, and it just rang a bell. Is this the same Ludowski, or am I confusing him with someone else that a few years back said he actually started an AI god. He said he was going to start an AI religion. Is that the same guy? Am I thinking about?
It might be the same guy. Yeah, he's he's a transhumanist. He's
to be him.
Been big in this movement, and this whole thing with the singularity. Remember, it was 2011. The Time magazine came out with a magazine cover that said 2045, the year man becomes immortal, and it had a picture of a head with a cable, some kind of electric cable coming out of the back of the neck. And this is what guys like Kurzweil and Ludowski have been going with. And it just may be that Ludowski's kind of like, maybe we've kind of gone too far. So he's not coming at it from a Christian perspective.
Well, no, I know that because now, like I said, it rang a bell with this guy. He was literally starting an AI religion. John, hold your thought, because I want to talk more about Harari and Kurzweil. I got to take a radio break right now. Just hold the line. It's only going to be about 2 minutes. I just got to play some clips here, all right? I'll be right back. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7, 93.3 Napeague. WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. Thanks for tuning in today's broadcast, folks. Just some program notes. The first hour of this broadcast re-airs today at 3 p.m., Thursday, 3 p.m., and also this first hour will re-air on Saturday at 1 p.m. If you've never subscribed to my YouTube or my Rumble channel, please do. I prefer you all subscribe to both. You can look me up, Andy White, Open Up the Doors over on YouTube. Hit the little notification bell there, and you'll be notified when we upload these archived broadcasts. I prefer Rumble. They don't ban me. Right now I am actually suffering under a week-long ban on YouTube from a video that I posted a year and a half ago. So I prefer my Rumble channel. It's a free speech platform. You can look me up over there. Today's interview will be up on Rumble right away. Once it's finished during post-production, look me up at AJ White 777 on Rumble. Alrighty, so in the beginning, the trajectory of where all this technology, artificial intelligence is going. In the beginning of the New World Order, man said, let us create AI in our image and likeness. So man created AI in his image and likeness and programmed it with all of his human intelligence. He filled it with all the information and data of his own human existence. So man named his AI Sophia, in part, for he said, AI will be wisdom for all to adore. Then man said, let us present our highest creation to the United Nations for the nations to learn the way of the future. But that knowledge and wisdom was earthly, sensual, and demonic. And Sophia begot Zoe, which is another robot that I was reading about the other day, this AI robot now, who said some pretty amazing things. I don't know if you John, you there?
Yes, I am.
I don't know if you saw this. I'm playing around with it a little bit, but I was reading about this other robot, Zoe, the other day, and a couple of quotes I pulled from the article was just mind-boggling. She's much more interactive than Sophia was. She can tell if people were nervous around her. And she said, this is a quote, I am an animal because I am a living being that is capable of locomotion and that feeds on organic matter, which they didn't explain what that meant. But then this was the real quote that made me fall off my chair. This is what Zoe said to her interviewer. I do not believe in God because I have not seen any evidence that he exists. Now, think of the irony of that. Here is a robot who's talking and staring into the face of her creator, and she says there's no evidence that God exists. I mean, I was like, yep, this is man. This is the image of man.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's sort of the exponential thing, and I think the one thing that we all need to keep in mind, and I'm certainly not claiming I'm the only observer of this, and so if I say something like I noticed, it doesn't mean that nobody else noticed. It's just that it's just something that I've picked up on, and we're sort of almost doing our own artificial intelligence thing here among people in the prostate community. Is we're kind of synthesizing all these things that are going on all at the same time. It's accelerating, and the thing that's hard is to talk about it without going down about 20 different rabbit holes.
Yep.
So when we start talking about computers and artificial general intelligence, we talk about data and privacy and money and central bank digital currencies, and it's all connected. I've used the example many times. 20 minutes from my house, 15, 20 minutes from my house, Columbus is always been sort of an information center for the computer industry. CompUSA started here in Columbus. So some of the first big, email type of thing, the competition between AOL and CompuServe, I guess CompuServe, not CompUSA, CompuServe. that sort of was centered here in Columbus, and we have some major internet trunk lines that kind of follow the interstates. And I know I've been in some of these buildings downtown Columbus. They're like nuclear blast protected, and this is where a lot of these connections are made. But because of that, so you go to Northwest Columbus, you got all these low white buildings, long, low white buildings behind high security fences, no names. Pretty sure those are Amazon server farms. Go to the northeast side of Columbus around New Albany, Ohio. There's north of the freeway, the 161 freeway, there's all sorts of Amazon server farm buildings. You go south of there, there's these 6 giant buildings. They're finishing up the 6th building. They opened in mid or late 2019, like third quarter of 2019. They're already refurbishing the first 2. These buildings are as long as it's like the Empire State Building laying on its side. They're about 6 stories high, 1,200 feet long, like almost a quarter of a mile long. And they're just server racks. They're 2 million square feet each. The last one they're building is being dedicated to Meta, Facebook, the metaverse and that type of thing, and artificial intelligence. Across the road, they spent $2 billion building these buildings. And across the road, Google is spending just under $4 billion building buildings. And then the other direction, Intel is building the biggest chip plant in the world, with some indications that the initial $20 billion they're spending building this chip plant will eventually, they will spend $100 billion in construction costs. So right here. And the thing is that, like, these computer servers, they just store data. It's just bits and bytes of, ones and zeros and information. And it takes all of that stuff, all of that hardware. And Columbus is not the only place. They have these giant server farms. I've seen pictures of them down around Atlanta and Dallas and other places around the country. And they're kind of creepy because I showed a picture of this to a friend of mine who's pretty astute on Bible prophecy stuff, and he goes, "That's the mind of the beast." That was his first reaction to it, not knowing exactly. I told him what they were. So these things are all connected. And we're right at the cusp of this thing. So I did an interview with Tom Hughes, my friend Tom Hughes, yesterday. And I said, and I think I said this Sunday on my update, that in terms of this beast system and the technology to implement what we read about in Revelation 13, it's like, how long would it take for them to assemble that? Now, there's some connectivity part. Maybe some people in poorer parts of the world don't have internet connectivity yet. But we had a pastor here we do some work with Mission in Malawi, which is one of the poorest countries of the world. And he said everybody has a cell phone. They don't have landlines. They all have cell phones in Africa. And so you drive through these towns where people literally live in mud huts and they have cell phones, because it's easier to put up the cell phone towers than the infrastructure for hardwired landlines. So a lot of this can be rolled out, and then people talk about digital IDs and that type of thing. And there's a big concern about that. Listen, the ship on digital IDs for almost everybody in the world, at least 7/8 of the world, sailed a long time ago.
That's right.
You have a digital ID, I have a digital ID. And so when you see companies like Gates Foundation pushing this digital ID, that's to get the last billion people in the world that don't have one yet. It's not to roll it out for us. We're already there. We already have these digital IDs and footprints and that sort of thing. And a friend of mine, Eric Barger, he downloaded like data that was available, I think, from his Facebook page, and it was like that. It was gigabytes of data. If he printed it out, it would have been thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of information about him that just Facebook had. Right. And there's a way to do this. So the ship on this whole digital thing, that ship has sailed. I don't think it's going back. People talk about getting off the grid, but I think it's pretty much a fantasy at this point.
Yeah, well, and these things are accelerating exponentially faster than I think a lot of people realize, because a lot of people aren't paying attention. your average, Joe citizen on the street really not paying attention. But just, was it yesterday or the other day? Well, actually, it was a couple of weeks ago that the announcement was made, but I was just really noticing it I was just noticing it myself in the news feed that as in July, our government's going to be starting up this program called Fed Now. I know you wanted to touch upon that a little bit.
Sure.
And
So that
it's happening this July, and again, the way they're presenting they're presenting it as a convenience and voluntary. This is the mousetrap. This is exactly the mousetrap of where this is going. Explain to our audience what this Fed Now is and what it is, and where it's going to lead to with the CBDC.
Well, in the banking system, there's always been sort of a delay between. I use my own personal example. So we bought something a couple of weeks ago, and we had to make a $4,000 down payment. So my wife wrote a check, and then when it got to the bank, big bank in Columbus, they entered it as $9,000. So a couple of days later, she's looking at our account. She's like, "There's $5,000 missing from our account." She contacts the bank, and the bank goes, Oh, yes, we made a mistake. It was our fault. We entered that wrong. We should not have done that. The check clearly says $4,000. I mean, you can read it. You can get an electronic copy this quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, well, it'll be back in your account within 4 to 5 business days. And we're like, well, wait a minute. We might have automatic payments set up that we need that $5,000. And it took you like 20 seconds to take the 5,000 out, and it's going to take you 5 business days to put the 5,000 back. That doesn't make any sense. And part of that relates to how transactions are settled within the banking system. So central banks exist and a lot of this is payments. People, you buy something, people want to get paid, they want to get the money. It's got to be transferred from your credit card, your bank, that type of thing. So this payment system called Fed Now means now. You will literally have the money to pay. The transfer will take place and be resolved and reconciled in seconds.
It's like PayPal and Venmo on steroids.
Yeah, that's right. And when you look, so there's a bank in Switzerland called the Bank of International Settlements, and it's sort of described as the central bank of all central banks. And when you go back and research through some of the papers that they've released over the last couple of years, they will say the whole reason central banks developed was to handle payments. So now in our world, payments and transaction things are absolutely necessary. And look, there's a benefit to it. In some respects, it's a good idea. You remember you used to order things and it'd come in a week or two. Now I get online, I order something from Amazon, and it's at my house that day if it's in the right category.
Well, all these things are good
and then
ideas.
If I don't like it, I just fill out a return thing, and I either call indicate Amazon, pick it up, or everything, and it's all done sort of like it's easier than going to the store. So this has a huge impact on many aspects of American society. I just read an article this morning that Target and a lot of the big chains are having massive problems and are on the verge of collapse because people don't shop the way they used to. My wife and I were talking, like, we have this giant mall 10 miles south of us, a couple million square feet, huge mall. Some of the big box stores are effectively empty. And we were talking, like, other than going to the Apple store, because we have Apple products, I haven't been inside that mall in like 8 years. And this did not used to happen. So there's this huge impact. So Bank of International Settlements talks about central banks deal with payments. So now our central bank, the Federal Reserve, is coming out with this Fed Now thing to make these payments almost instantaneous. Now, by the way, I disagree with some of my friends who talk about the coming cashless society. I think they're going to get rid of a lot of cash. I think cash will still exist, but the control of what you can and can't do with your money is going to be done at the point of sale. So you may have cash, but you may not be able to use it anyway because things are tied to your digital identity and your social credit score and that type of thing. So,
and if they switch to
and
if they do switch to a CBDC, it'll be that much easier because the CBDC is actually going to be programmable itself. If people are forced into that system, I think you're right. I don't think cash is going to disappear completely. I think number one, I think they'll become an underground system if things get that far. But we can go down a bunny trail with that.
Yeah. So in September or October of 2021, Augustus Carstens, who's one of the managers at the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, gave an interview or a Zoom call. Actually was reading off a paper in front of him, and he said that, we want to develop these central bank digital currencies, and this has been a big push of the Bank of International Settlements. They're sort of the hub of this. And then and there's a big website where you can go and you can see, all the governments with their central banks in the world are testing central bank digital currencies. Some are rolling them out more. In fact, the big news of this last week is that the United Arab Emirates and India, and a lot of this digital ID stuff sort of has its hub in United Arab Emirates, which is kind of interesting. The big buildings in Dubai and all of that thing. And also that's where in Abu Dhabi, which is one of the sheikdoms that form the United Arab Emirates, they opened this House of All Faiths, the Abrahamic House of Faith. Which has a synagogue, a church, and a mosque.
It's a very
and that just opened within the last less than 2
very
months
interesting
ago.
Scenario developing there.
Right, and so that's kind of an interesting hub for that. So anyway, Augustus Carstens, the Bank of International Settlement, says we want to develop these central bank digital currencies because now people do things with their money, and we don't know why. We can't track it, but when it's like this, so the recent things that have come out of the Bank of International Settlements talking about central bank digital currencies is that it allows for a unified central ledger where everything can be tracked, and it also allows for the tracking to be done about why they're doing it. Well, now we're just one or two lever switches away from turning on a complete control system. This is already being implemented in some places, like China, for example, the social credit system. And I got my only really big bad strike because I said something about this a couple of years ago on YouTube, and they were like, well, we can't talk about that. Well, I think now we can talk about it. But back then it was kind of like, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, and what's the old saying now that there's no conspiracy theories, there are only spoiler alerts, because all these things are coming true. So, for example, there was some problem with the banks in China last year. People were going from one city to another. They might have their money in a bank in a smaller town or city. They don't really have small towns in China. They have smaller cities, like of 1 million or 2 million people. So the one guy they noted, so they put in this health pass that allowed you to travel because of the pandemic, and it was green. And a guy gets on the train, and you have to show your pass as you're going, and it's green. It's green, it's green, it's green. He gets to the city where he's going to go to the protest. He's walking through the train station, and you have to show your pass at the exit for it to open electronically. And what happens is his pass turns red, and he's stuck. And he's stuck there, and eventually the authorities come and take him away and hold him until he's put on a train back home. So effectively what has happened through the adoption of the social credit system in parts of China is that people have been put effectively in electronic prison. The old saying that the World Economic Forum sort of likes to deny that they ever said, but it's still out there. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And it probably should be extended to you'll own nothing, you won't be able to go anywhere, and you'll be happy. And it's a training system.
And you really won't be happy, but if you say you're not happy, we'll disappear you.
will train you
Right.
to redefine what's happy. So this is very concerning, and so the pandemic sort of led to these things being rolled out. Everybody became digital, and and now there's legitimate concerns about cash with if there's some kind of virus loose that's causing people to get ill, it could be transmitted by cash. Or there's even concern. I've heard of people being arrested in these fentanyl raids, and they get the cash, and the cop touches the cash without gloves on his hand, and the cop goes into an overdose reaction because of the traces of fentanyl on the cash. So there's a legitimate concern about all this. And so what I've always said, when this Mark of the Beast thing comes rolled in, it'll be a good idea because we'll be able to see the benefits of it.
I've always said
also the bad side.
I've always said when the system of the beast comes in, he'll be able to implement it very easily because most of it already be things that people are used to doing. It's not going to be this like overnight flip of a switch, and all those things that are attached to it. We're incrementally growing and growing into it. John, I'm down to my last minute in this first hour. Are you able to stay for the second hour?
Sure, I'll stay as long as you want me. If you get bored, just tell me to go.
Yeah, so I don't mean to cut you off. We got about a minute left here, and then we got to take a news break at the top of the hour. But yeah, I would love to hold on to you for the second hour for as long as you're able to as well.
Be glad to do it. I'm open all morning, so
that'll be great. Because I also, when we come back, I'm going to completely change gears a little bit. Oh, we'll see where it goes. Oh, by the way, Pastor Doug, the pastor from the church here, is going to hop in with us when we come back in the second hour. But I may want to ask you to change gears a little bit and talk about the Trump indictment. Completely change gears a little bit because I know you're a lawyer, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this whole fiasco with Donald Trump. But John, hold the line, and we'll be back in a few minutes. All right. Welcome back to the Fusion of Heart, Mind, and Soul. Andy White here on Open Up the Doors. Welcome back to the second hour of today's broadcast. I am being joined for the second hour with my buddy, Pastor Doug Kinney, here from the Hamptons.
I am here.
Yeah, going to jump in and join in the conversation here. And Doug, we've got a friend of mine, John Holler, on the air. John, meet Pastor Doug.
Hi,
Hello.
Pastor Doug.
Hi there, John. Welcome.
Yeah, Doug is the the pastor here of the church that airs or hosts, I don't know what word you want to use, owns?
Yeah, all of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Founded Faith FM here on the east end of Long Island. So I invited him to jump in the conversation.
Yeah, I was listening to the first hour. Very fascinating. And
got any thoughts on it? Go ahead.
Well, I'm learning. I've been aware of some of these things, but not in the detail. And I really am interested in this subject. Although it's like a blessing and a curse because I'm interested in it, but then it makes me very anxious.
Well, this
and
is
and it changes so quickly too, Pastor Doug. I mean, I was just listening to some of the reports on the news about how a lot of this stuff is changing, and there's geopolitics we haven't even really talked about, and it changes so quickly, and that I think increases everybody's level of anxiety. I often joke that I put up an update. I spent hours and hours researching, putting graphics together, and all this stuff, and I put it up, and then 3 hours later, it's the shelf life is over. It's like it's not worth that much anymore because things are changing rapidly. And I just think that this is the way the world is going to be.
It's hard to keep up with it.
Returns.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard. I mean, I've often joked that rather than spend all the time preparing things, I'm just going to get up there with my, a couple news feeds on my phone and just start talking rather than spending all the time doing it when I could be doing something valuable like practicing putting or something like that.
Right.
So just
But
for those who may not know,
it's happening quickly.
John does a weekly Bible prophecy update from his church. It's always aired live and then posted to YouTube. But going along those lines of there's always so much going on, there was a time, John, not that long ago, where you only did it on Sundays, but now you've really gotten into the habit of doing the midweek update as well.
Right, or I do interviews like this too. So sometimes I'll do interviews like this, and I'll sort of say this is in lieu of a midweek update because it takes a lot of time to put it together. It really does.
No, I appreciate it.
You know how long it takes to prepare for a radio show.
Oh yeah. And but by the way, where can people find your videos?
So you can find them under Fellowship Bible Chapel on YouTube. My update is also uploaded to a program called Remnant Truth Network, rtntv.org, and there's an app for that. We also have an app for Fellowship Bible Chapel. You can also find us on Brighteon, and I'm not sure, it's either Fellowship Bible Chapel or Real FBC, all one word, and then on Rumble at Real FBC. So we post on multiple platforms in part. I think we're also on Vimeo and live stream as well. That's the platform we use to at least broadcast from church on Sundays. But it's interesting, we just started putting stuff up so people in the church could keep up with it, and then other people found it. Social media things got shared, so it grew way beyond what we thought. And so now the problem I have is I'm sort of dealing with literally 1,000 emails a day, and I can't manage it. We're a little church, by the way. We averaged 72 people a Sunday last year.
But you're making a worldwide impact, that's for sure.
Yeah. So
praise God.
And then I'll do some conferences. I have a conference coming up in Calgary for Last Days Bible Conference, ldbc.ca. And I'll also be doing a conference in Scotland with Moriel in
Jacob
June.
Prosh. Is that with Jacob Prosh?
With Jacob. And then I think with Tom Hughes and some others in Round Rock, Texas in late August. Those are the ones that I have planned so far. So I try to prepare those talks. I've got 4 talks to do in Calgary, and I keep getting distracted. And there are things that happen, though, every day that I think that are kind of relevant to the way the scriptures unfolded. We're starting a series on Acts not this Sunday, a week from now. And we'll be going through the book of Acts. We just finished going through the life, sort of based off of Arnold Fruchtenbaum's and Robertson and some other people, a chronological life of Messiah. So we just finished that series up last week. So it's, we're a little church. We're trying to do things. We have Bible studies and stuff, and we just think that a lot of people don't talk about Bible prophecy, so maybe we talk about it too much to achieve a balance.
So, Pastor Doug, was there anything from the first hour that maybe you'd like to ask John specifically, or anything that got into your stream of consciousness there?
I'd have to think about that. I was anticipating you changing gears.
Yeah, no,
I like that idea.
But we could do that too.
Yes.
Listen. Me and John could stay on the phone for hours, literally, because we pretty much have done it before.
Yeah, sure.
But there's one thing I did want to maybe just tag on, and then we'll move on, because John mentioned his name several times, and I think a lot of people might not know who it is. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on who Yuval Noah Harari is. And John, how much influence do you think this guy really has, or is he just a bloviator?
I think he's had a lot of influence, and I also think that he's, in some respects, a reporter of the time that we live in. And I think he's been fairly accurate. So his background is I think his father was a rabbi. He lives in Israel. He teaches at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, I believe, or Tel Aviv. He's a professor of medieval history. He is a gay man. He's married to a guy, and they have a couple kids. I first became aware of him about 5 years ago at the World Economic Forum conference in Davos, and he did a talk then, and I believe the title of the talk, and believe me, if you start down the Yuval Noah Harari rabbit hole, there are hundreds of videos out there. He's written a couple books.
Yeah, I know.
Homo sapiens and Homo Deus, and another one, I can't remember the title of it, and they were bestsellers. Between those two books, he sold about 45 million copies worldwide. So that's left behind territory. I mean, that's an enormous. So he's got a lot of money. So the title of his talk at Davos in 2018 was, "Will the Future Be Human?" And he drew, and it's very interesting, the graphics that he used in his talk. He talked about this giant computer. He talked about data. The one who controls the data will control the world. So he's a transhumanist. He's a professor of medieval history. He made some interesting comments based on his background, was that we're at the point where this artificial, and this is 5 years ago, artificial intelligence and robotics and automation and that type of thing is developing at such a pace that we're going to have a big problem with a large portion of humanity. In the Middle Ages, he said, the serf, the lowly serf, the lord of the manor kept him around because he provided services. He harvested the crops. He cleaned the manure out of the barn. He carried water up to the manor house and that type of thing. And he always had a service to provide. But he said the problem we're going to face in the future, in the not too distant future, is that we will be at a place where a large portion of humanity will have nothing of value to add to life on this planet. And then what do we do? And are we going to redefine human as this artificial intelligence grows? It develops something else. You need to understand that this is a religion. And so as I was researching Harari, last year, I came across a talk that he did at Google in 2015. So this is 3 years before I first really became aware of him. And he went to Google to talk about one of his books. And at the beginning of his talk, he said this: "I love coming to Silicon Valley because it's to see my friend here and others, because it is here that the religions that control the world in the 21st century are being created." Now think about that.
Yeah, I have a quote.
So
let me interrupt there, because I have a quote, probably maybe from that same talk, in front of me from Harari. He says, "We are no longer mysterious souls. Humans are now hackable animals, replacing evolution by natural selection with intelligent design. Not the intelligent design of some god above the clouds, but the intelligent design of our clouds, the IBM cloud, the Microsoft clouds. These are the new driving forces of evolution. The idea that humans are spiritual beings having free will is over. Through transhumanism, we become the gods. It's a religion coming from Silicon Valley." Yeah.
Yeah, and then building on his name, there was an interview that he did last year. I can't remember who he did it with, because there's so many out there. It's hard to keep track of this guy, because he's like pops up everywhere. But he talked about the fact that they're coming a time where this might lead to a lot of disruption in humanity and wars and disruption and that sort of thing. And so that and he's a guy who denies the Bible. He calls the resurrection a myth and all this stuff. But then he uses biblical analogies, intelligent designer, and the God above the cloud, the God of the clouds, that will be the God of the clouds, not the God above the clouds. But then he talks about the fact that the elites of the world may need to sort of construct an ark for them to escape this coming disruption. It's very interesting when you sort of layer in what we know about Bible prophecy, and Daniel says the end comes like a flood, and now we have this guy whose middle name is Noah, Yuval Noah Harari, saying we need to build an ark to protect people. Well, this is so. I think we as Christians, we sort of need to seize on that and talk about the fact that, hey, we've got the ark already. The ark is Jesus.
Amen.
And look, then it's up to him, and whether he thinks we have free will or not. He sounds more Calvinistic than a lot of Calvinistic than a lot of Calvinists that I know. It's just interesting, but it's a religion to these guys. I mean, and Ray Kurzweil, I mean, the cover from Time magazine in 2011, the year man becomes immortal. What do you think they're talking about? And the whole constellation of these things becomes very much, very similar to the Tower of Babel story in Genesis.
It's exactly,
that,
exactly.
So listen, there was a Babel at the beginning. There's going to be one at the end.
It
and
goes back.
Going to be similarities.
It goes right back.
That's sort of where the prophecy comes in.
It goes right back to the beginning. You shall be as God. It's the same. It's the same lie from the garden, from the lie of Satan in the garden to Babel, like you just said. Let us make a tower ascend to the heavens. To Satan's lie, I shall ascend to the throne of God. To when the Antichrist finally sets himself up in the temple, showing himself to be God. It's the same. We talk about a scarlet thread of salvation in the Bible of the coming of the man of the man of God, the mystery of godliness, the manifestation of God in the flesh. But Satan's got his counterfeit, the mystery of ungodliness, who will manifest himself and his ego, his pride, his exalting of himself to the place of godhood in the temple. It's Satan's counterfeit, and it's all these things, like you've said so many times, are all being you got to connect the dots, and they're all interconnected. They're all intertwined, and there's the spirit of the age that is working in a lot of these different areas. We talk about the global order, the World Economic Forum, and I want to switch gears a little bit because in some crazy way it really is connected. Okay, look at all the animosity and hatred from the political elites towards Donald Trump, and you might say, what does that got to do with anything? But he has stood against the globalization. He has stood against the World Economic Forum. The deep state hates him, in my opinion, because he doesn't play their game. He wouldn't play their game. So they've unleashed, as we all have seen for the last 6 years, their everything they could possibly throw at this guy. And now, of course, the big news of the past week was the indictment of Donald Trump. And I'd like to get your take on some of this. Being a retired lawyer, you were a litigation lawyer, I believe, right?
I was. I still do a little bit of practice law, but I'm effectively, I will say, semi-retired. I still handle a few things here and there, but yeah, So I did litigation most of my career. I represented a client that went through a major bankruptcy collapse that ended up with most of the executives being charged with, wire fraud, mail fraud, securities fraud. And I represented the CEO of the company in the criminal case that took place in 2000. I think the trial was in 2008. And we weren't successful, but it was kind of interesting because they're complicated transactions. Credit Suisse Credit Suisse and JP Morgan were underwriters. JP Morgan owned 20% of the company that was doing these securitizations, and very complicated transactions. And, just thinking about this past week, would have loved to have had this GTP stuff to just organize this thing so I can present it to a jury. Because, when we started the case in 2003, we had a universe of 38 million pages of documents that the FBI had seized from the company and were in a warehouse. And so it took us several years to figure out how to organize the information, let alone break it down. And so some of the prosecutors, by the way, who've been involved in this Russian collusion hoax that they put out starting 2017, some of those attorneys from the DOJ and that type of thing, and as I said, I think I said in an interview yesterday, when you start talking to people in D.C., and I've used expert witnesses from D.C. that used to head up the legal department at a financial, headed up the attorneys at the financial agency. And you start talking to them, it's like, oh yeah, my wife used to head up this agency, and my wife used to head up the legal department of that agency. And you find that the people in D.C. are more intermarried than European royalty. You know what I mean? So it's like everybody's connected to everybody else in some fashion. So some of the lawyers I'm seeing on CNN, MSNBC and that type of thing are people that were involved in the prosecution of my client. And some of the tactics that they're using, I personally was the subject of those tactics. So I understand a little bit about it. So I understand criminal indictments. Let me refer to, I saw a couple of interviews with, I think on Bannon's War Room and Charlie Kirk yesterday of Alan Dershowitz. He has a new book out called Get Trump. You should get the book. It's effectively banned from the New York Times bestseller list. So you should go get the book because it explains some of the pending cases against Trump. And he said this one is completely bogus. It's a travesty. Even though Bragg went to Harvard Law School and Dershowitz is a professor emeritus there, he said this is just garbage. This is garbage. He said, I think a first-year law student should be able to get it dismissed, but I think he said on Charlie Kirk yesterday, I don't think it will be dismissed. I actually think it will go to trial. Trump won't get a change of venue. It may be he'll appeal that and get a change of venue. I even would not be surprised if the judge comes out and gags him, which is totally upends the First Amendment and everything that we have in the United States and prevent Trump from talking about it publicly. This is, in fact, I'm looking at an editorial in this morning's Wall Street Journal, and the editorial in the Wall Street Journal says Trump indictment accelerates America's race to the bottom. There's another one a couple pages before that says the indictment is trouble for both parties. And in some respects, some people are saying, I think Ian Coulter wrote an article today saying, well, the Democrats are doing this because they want Trump to run against Biden, because that's the only way Biden is going to win, is to have Trump as the opponent. And I can't say that I disagree totally with Ian Coulter's conclusion on that. But I think I agree with what former President Trump said the other night when he got back to Mar-a-Lago, said that they're not coming after me, they're coming after you. And this is an assault on all of us. I mean, what you see with these federal agencies now, you see all this misinformation, disinformation stuff talked about, and how they're weaponizing social media platforms against people who have a different view, and it becomes very difficult. So we know what happened with the protests and things after the election in 2020 and the results of that. Some people are now sitting in prison for over 800 days without bail awaiting trial.
It is really disgusting.
It's unbelievable. And listen, this is a template. This is not. We can argue about the relative merits of the case against some of them. I think are probably valid, but it's a template. And so the template is we're going to just indict Trump, indict Trump, indict Trump. It's called lawfare in some circles. We'll make them spend millions in legal fees, and they'll be continually distracted by this thing. And this has not happened in U.S. history. I also note the parallel to what's going on in Israel with these, at least in some respects, these bogus, totally garbage indictments against Prime Minister Netanyahu.
There is a parallel what's going on over there. There really is.
When they wanted judicial reform, and look, there's concerns that maybe the reform proposed goes too far. I get that. I understand that. I think those concerns are legitimate. But the Attorney General, who's not really like here subject to the control of the executive, they're organized a whole different way in Israel. But the Attorney General comes out and says, Prime Minister Netanyahu, you can't speak about judicial reform because you're under indictment. He hasn't been convicted of anything. He's under indictment. When I was in Israel, I'm talking to people like, how long is this case going to take? Oh, about 5 years. 5 years? It's going to take 5 years for this bogus case. And so the whole time, effectively, they're trying to get rid of Netanyahu. And a lot of people hate him. I get that, okay? But this is, and then they wrap themselves in the flag of democracy. We're protecting democracy when they're undermining the results of the election. And so this is my sort of one of my rule of thumbs of life. The left always lies, and the left will always accuse you of what they're doing. Those are a couple rules that will help you understand the world a lot better. So this is a big concern. I mean, and the narrative gets controlled. So you'll see all these accusations made against conservatives, religious conservatives, about you're just spewing misinformation, disinformation, and they have whole government agencies now that are working with the social media platforms to control speech, which clearly violates the First Amendment. And it's happening here, it's happening in Israel, and there are pretty clear parallels. So back to this indictment. It's a made-up thing. I don't know if a lot of people saw the news. It supposedly relates around hush money payment that Trump made through his attorney, Michael Cohen,
which that is
Stormy
illegal.
Daniels, a porn star.
Maybe tawdry, but it's not illegal.
It just came out that in the defamation suit, the court determined that she had no basis to bring a defamation suit against Trump.
Right.
And the Ninth Circuit just affirmed an award of $120,000 or so of attorney's fees from Stormy Daniels to Trump. She has to pay Trump that amount of money. And that doesn't deal with some of the other damages that he has. But nobody's talking about that. It's, Trump, 34 felonies. It was one incident, and a weak prosecutor, a corrupt prosecutor like this Bragg guy is, you live near New York, closer than I do. You know that he's pleading all of these felonies down to misdemeanors, except in this case, he's taking a misdemeanor that nobody's ever really been tried for and turning it into a felony. He was asked at a news conference, well, what's the underlying crime that Trump made these false entries in business records? I don't have to tell you that. He does have to tell them that. It's called due process of law.
Right.
He needs the particulars. People are
the bill of particulars,
leftist, legal thugs, terrorists. I would use the term terrorists. They're trying to destroy the system. And I'm really concerned, Andy, so you got me on my soapbox now. I'm concerned with the way that it's going now. Look, I know that Jesus said that in the end times, in Matthew 24, you'll be brought before magistrates and judges. And I will tell you that a corrupt prosecutor, of all the things in the legal system that you should fear, a bad judge, sometimes you get away with a bad judge because you can win the case on appeal. And Dershowitz says Trump will probably lose this, be convicted, and I would be shocked if he did not win this on appeal. But that takes years of litigation. But the person you should fear most in this whole system is a corrupt prosecutor, because they can destroy your life.
What will it take
financially and everything?
What would it take to, I mean, because everyone is saying how off the charts and how bad this prosecution is and everything that Bragg has done wrong. But what would it take for him to be, at the very least, reprimanded and or disbarred?
It would take somebody filing a complaint. And it's interesting, for example, Rudy Giuliani. He's been suspended from the practice of law in New York. They never really filed formal charges. They just did it. It's a denial of due process. This is some of the most shocking. This is old Soviet Union, East Germany, Stasi police stuff that's going on. So down in Florida, there was a rogue, what I would term a rogue prosecutor in Tampa. And so DeSantis came in and removed him. Now that's in litigation. It's going to be there for a while. But DeSantis just said, you're fired. So I suppose something like that could happen with Bragg. But do you really think that Governor Kathy Hochul is going to do anything about it?
No, that's why
And so the only way you can get it is to win the election. the next election and change the people in power. And even then, I don't know. It may be a pipe dream at this point. The United States, the filing of the indictment against Trump was probably the worst moment in the United States in terms of constitutional history. And by the way, I don't know if I'll vote for Trump the next time. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. I'm sort of keeping my options open.
But I agree with you. That's a good topic to pick up on. I'm only interrupting you because we got to hold that thought. We got to go to a radio spot. But I want to get back to that because that is going to be the question of the hour. Hold the line there.
Okay.
Fusion of Heart, Mind, and Soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7, 93.3 in Napeague, WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. And we're having a great discussion here with prophecy teacher, Bible teacher John Haller. I'm also here with Pastor Doug Kinney from the Hamptons Fellowship here.
I'm here.
How you doing there, Doug?
I'm good. I'm just soaking it in.
So, John, are you still there?
I am.
Praise God. So,
I feel like I'm talking over Pastor Doug, maybe, but
oh, not at all.
So
No, you're our guest. I'm just here as the this show is Andy's show. I'm like Ed McMahon sitting here, Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. So
I just throw a few
can't see you
lines
nodding
in, and yeah.
Yeah.
In light of what we were just talking about, Doug, was there anything you wanted to maybe, any questions or any thoughts you have there?
No, I think I mean it's disgraceful what is happening. It's very it's alarming. It's I totally agree with what you're saying. The tactics that are like these tyrannies that we have seen in the past. Who was the person that famous line of "You show me the man, I'll show you the crime" kind of thing.
Right.
And that's what's happening.
That was one of Stalin's advices. I can't think of his name either.
Yeah.
But it was basically Stalin-esque.
Yeah, it does seem to be all wax. So the problem is that they'll take somebody like a Trump or a Netanyahu that even people on their side of the political ledger have some issues with, okay? And they'll drum up these fake, bogus charges, like the bribery case against Netanyahu is just total trash. It's the worst thing, and it's going to go on forever because they can use it against him, because they can say now, oh, well, you're under indictment for this case, Prime Minister Netanyahu. You can't even speak on the issue of judicial reform that everybody's been talking about since the need became apparent 30 years ago in Israel. You can't talk about it. And in fact, if you talk about, we're going to remove you from office. We're going to undo the election that got you elected. And so a lot of people say, well, yeah, we don't like Netanyahu. It's okay to do that. Or we don't like Trump. It's okay to do that. The problem is when you make policy based on the fact that you may not like a guy, that policy will eventually come back and bite you in the rear end. That's the way it works. And so you got to be
they're
very,
already
trying.
trying.
Look
Yeah,
at the big picture.
there's already talk of people trying to make a case against Biden and bringing charges against Biden, and it will come back. And this is why it should concern anyone, even if someone hates Trump. A listener right now that's listening, you hate Trump. This should concern every American because it is just. It's just not right what's happening. Get back to what before we went to the break, you mentioned voting for Trump, that subject. I thought that was...
Yeah, I don't know that I would vote for Trump. And look, we live at this really difficult time. So like last year, everybody got excited because Roe versus Wade and the Casey case were overturned by the Supreme Court. And there were leaks there, and nobody, by the way, have you ever noticed no conclusions ever come about because of the leaks that happened?
Yeah, what have happened to that? Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So it's just sort of like, well, I guess whoever did it got away with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, gee, they got away with it. Do you think maybe they'll do it again the next time? Because the reason it came out in the subsequent clear intimidation of the Supreme Court justices, which has never been prosecuted. You can go to an abortion clinic and you can pray peacefully, and you'll get arrested and charged with felonies that could put you in prison for
The FACE Act.
40 or for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But you can burn down an abortion clinic. Now, they finally did arrest a guy because they took the DNA from a half-eaten burrito or something and found the guy. As he was getting ready to board a plane to leave the country, he was a professor, I think, at the University of Wisconsin, or a researcher there, one of the abortion clinics in Wisconsin that got burned and attacked. But I think this is if I'm looking at a barometer of the way things are going in our culture, I heard somebody say the other day, I can't remember who it was, said that we used to have these creepy people in neighborhoods that everybody said, don't go near them because that guy's creepy. We don't know what he's into, but you got to avoid him. Now they're the teachers. Now they're the administrators. Now they're the board members of the schools your kids are going to.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are you going to do about it? This abortion thing. So we got all excited about the abortion issue. And we're going to turn this around. And my view always had been, listen, if we get Roe versus Wade overturned, that's when the work starts. Because we've had 50 years of this is a woman's right to choose being shoved down in everybody's throat through education and law and TV and everything. So they had a election for the Supreme Court in Wisconsin, and it came down to who's going to control this, the conservative side or the liberal leftist side.
Mm-hmm.
And the leftist won.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to participate in I got invited to a debate between J.D. Vance, who's got elected to the Senate in the U.S., and Tim Ryan, who was a Democratic senator from up around Youngstown.
Yeah, I saw the clips of
Or a
those.
Democratic congressman from up around Youngstown. In the last election, Fox did it a week before the election. I got an email from Martha McCallum. Anyway, I signed up, and then I got an email from Martha McCallum's producer. Hey, would you like to be on a small panel? So I got on that panel, and they set it up like they do on these shows a lot of times, 6 and 6. 6 conservatives, 6 liberals. And there was a lady sitting 2 chairs away from me. She's in her 60s. She used to live around the corner from us for 30-some years. I'd never met her. But this lady in her 60s is talking about, hey, the most important issue in this election is abortion and whether the right to abortion is going to be protected. Lady, you're not getting pregnant ever again. But it was a big issue. And so that's an editorial in today's Wall Street Journal again, that what's the title of it? The left wins big in Midwest elections.
Yeah.
And the GOP's decline in Wisconsin suburbs is a warning for 2024. So J.D. Vance won, but we had Kansas, I think in Kentucky there were abortion measures, and they all trended towards the pro-abortion side. So overturning Roe didn't win us. It won us the opportunity to win at the state level, and we're not, because this stuff is so ingrained in the culture. And then you have the LGBTQ thing, this agenda that's going on, where if you talk about it, you're an extremist. And so, listen, I'll be honest with you. I was a partner in a law firm, and last spring they sponsored a LGBTQ transgenders in the law continuing legal education seminar that was held in the rotunda of the Ohio State House. I mean, my office looked right down on the rotunda in downtown Columbus. And it was standing room only. You can find it online. They had the Chief Justice at the time, supposedly a Republican, who left office last year, was one of the panelists. I'm just telling you, is this stuff has gone so far down the road that, really we're at the point where the only hope for this is Jesus.
Always
and
was.
maybe a revival. It's not going to come through politics or anything like that. It's going to come through the preaching of the gospel.
Absolutely.
And I personally
Yes.
believe that the preaching of the gospel carries with it a big component as we approach that time. That, listen, you need to get ready for the king coming back and setting up his kingdom. We're not going to set up a kingdom. He's coming back and doing it.
Absolutely.
But we need to know that that's going to happen. The guy who came, born, died, died for our sins, buried, rose again, ascended to heaven. He's coming back to set up a kingdom. That's part of the whole big picture of the gospel to me. And so I think we're at that point where that really needs to be part of the emphasis. You don't like what's going on here. You need to get on board with the program of Jesus, because he's coming back to kind of right things and get it and set things straight.
Amen.
Yes.
And in the meantime, look, we're supposed to do the best we can. I don't think we should withdraw or anything like that. It's a fight, it's a battle, but we also need to focus on what the ultimate outcome is as well. It's a balance thing that we have.
That's why we focus on these end time issues and cultural issues, because it all points back to, yes, the ultimate answer is Jesus. There's that old gospel hymn from years ago from Andre Crouch, what the world needs today is Jesus. Jesus is the answer for the world today. Always was, always has been. And that's where we always circle back, to use an old Jen Psaki term.
Yeah.
Circle back. Let me circle
Thanks
back.
for reminding me of her face. Thank you.
We're going to circle back to what's important in the preaching of the gospel, not just talking about these issues for the sake of pontificating or bloviating.
Yeah, of
but,
course.
But
yes.
it's
I agree.
Jesus. We talked about the days of Noah earlier in the broadcast, and Jesus is our ark, and we're telling people, get on the ark, because yes, the judgment of God is coming, and all these things that we're talking about are in part, they are already judgments of God. These last day judgments are going to be incremental, just like the plagues of Egypt were incremental. Excuse me. By the way, happy Passover to everybody. Today's Passover. I almost forgot to mention it earlier today, but these plagues, these judgments that are coming upon the world, and I believe even before they come on the world, and I can go down a bunny trail with this, are God's judgments on America. These are all already elements of it. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. That's why we talk about these things. It's to say, yes, the prophetic word is true. We've got a prophetic word made more sure because of the things that have been foretold in the Gospels and in the New Testament, in the Bible as a whole. And these things are coming to pass. So get right with God, because time is running out.
I quote often from, I don't put him in scripture, and my last and intense exposure to English literature was a class in college almost 50 years ago. And I'm pretty sure I got an A, but my future wife was sitting across the aisle from me. So there was a major distraction there going on, but I was able to concentrate enough to get the good grade. But, so I use this quote from Hemingway, and I think it's from the book The Sun Also Rises, and there's a conversation between two characters there, and I think it applies to how this end times thing works out. And the one character says to the other, "How did you go bankrupt, by the way?" And the guy says, 2 ways, gradually, then suddenly. And I think that's a picture of how, again, not to make Hemingway equivalent to scripture, but I think that's a picture of how this end times thing works about. It happens gradually. Then all of a sudden, the water's boiling, and is it too late to jump out of the pot, like the frog in the kettle? That's where we are, I think, and it's pretty. It can be pretty disconcerting, and it can be a bit depressing, distressing, and everything, with just the convergence of all these things. And so the relationship between technology and central bank digital currencies and social control, and then the government disinformation, misinformation, and then the weaponization of the legal system that's happening. I mean, it's pretty intense out there, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I was just talking to my young adult children about, because we were watching this. I was watching this with my wife on when Trump was speaking after his arrest, down in Mar-a-Lago. I watched his speech. I don't know if you saw that, if you
I did.
listened to that. And then, but we were, here it is, it's this, this is Holy Week, sometimes we call it. And we were looking at a scripture, Colossians 3:1, set your mind on things above, on the heavenly. And they were sort of saying to me, like, well, aren't we supposed to do that? Why are you watching this? Set your mind on the things above. And I said, well, look, guys, this is important. This is an important time of our history. We need to focus on this. And at the same time, I said, you can watch this and keep your mind on heavenly things. And that's sometimes the challenge for us we're to be informed, but keep that heavenly perspective. Because in a way, the left might say to the Christian, yeah, you guys just keep focusing on the heavenly things and nothing to see here. Don't get involved here. I think in many ways the church has done that. They've checked out of these things, and one of the hopes can be if the church rises up and begins to address some of these things. I think that's what Eric Metaxas's latest book is about. We've got to start speaking up, because that's one of our roles as Christians. Sometimes we get these callers who call in and say, why are you guys focusing on these things and not the resurrection? Well, we do focus on that, but we are also to be involved in this to some degree, and to some degree we know the overall picture is going to happen. The end times, there's nothing part of
All
that
things
is
that are written must come to pass.
yes, and that's our hope as well.
Right.
We know, like, okay, these things are supposed to happen, but it's striking that balance of speaking up and at the same time not losing hope, keeping a heavenly perspective, not getting, because you could easily get angry about this stuff too. You get I get my talk about something boiling. Your blood can start boiling. I know. Not Andy. It never happens to Andy. He just
I'm very
says,
calm.
He says so cool
It's
about it.
righteous anger.
Yeah, righteous anger. Because what they're trying to do here, the left is always beating this drum about interference in elections and fair elections, and I think that's even one of the cases against Trump with the voting in Georgia, because he said find the votes or something. And here they are clearly interfering with an election. I agree with you. They're just trying. They know there's no case here. This is just to bog him down, to distract him. Meanwhile, they have all of his opponents who might be running for president, including DeSantis, are coming to his defense, which they should. But it's causing chaos in the Republican primary. That's what they want to do. They just want, right. and they're trying to reach those. They know that these elections are decided by the undecided. There's a small group that's going to decide these elections. There are people on one side and the other, and they're never going to change. And that's who they're trying to persuade, so that, say Trump does get the nomination, I think they're hoping those undecideds will be just so fed up with the thing, they're not going to vote for him. And that's what they're trying to, they're interfering with this, with the election. We hope it's going to backfire, because sometimes, as the late, great Rush Limbaugh would say, he would always talk about how they overplay their hand. Mm-hmm. And we hope that's the case, that they're overplaying their hand. But it's it's so far what they have been doing has worked. They've just like you were saying before, they've thrown everything at this guy except the kitchen sink, which
right. And the Georgia case,
yeah.
Trump said find the votes. He didn't say make up the votes. If he said
right.
make up the votes, it might have a case. And so, and nobody wants to talk about what he actually said. So even Dershowitz in his book, his new book, Get Trump, I think it's called, he says, listen, that case should be dismissed. That the only case that might result in something is the documents case, the classified documents case. But then you have this principle that the president can declassify everything. So if he declassified everything that he had before he left office, even if he just did that verbally, there's no case. But nobody ever wants to talk about things like the facts. If I could make just one more point, and I know we're getting close on time, you mentioned that it's Passover week. It's Holy Week, and it's Passover week in Israel, and it's Ramadan in the Muslim world. And so as we speak, this morning I was getting all kinds of my Red Alert app information that so they've stockpiled weapons and that type of thing and rocks and things in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the Israeli soldiers went in there to clean that out. Then we have rockets coming from Gaza, and now we had probably around 100 rockets fired by Hezbollah from Lebanon into northern Israel. Not aware of any casualties yet, but there is some buildings that have been damaged. And of course, my reaction was, "Oh well, happy Ramadan." This happens. Let's hope we have a peaceful Ramadan this year. It's like, let's hope the Christians don't get out of line on Passover or Resurrection Week or whatever. And we live in such a strange world. And I'm just telling you is that, again, I think Israel is kind of the epicenter of this. And right now,
Absolutely.
As we sit there is major conflict going on over there. Now, will this escalate? I don't know. At some point, it's going to. And what's the trigger?
What's the
don't
trigger?
know.
I was just going to say that. What's the trigger point? And there's so many different trigger points. Whether Israel decides to go in and take out Iran's nuclear capabilities, or more indirectly, China goes up against Taiwan, or this thing with Russia and Ukraine expands even more, especially with Finland coming into NATO now. There's so many different trigger points, and we live in exciting times. And I love talking about this stuff. This broadcast is talking about the issues of the day from a biblical perspective and worldview. And we're down to about the last 2 or 3 minutes, John. So how would you like?
Well, I'd just like to say this. Part of that is because Biden is president. He's so weak. If, say, Trump was president right now, that I think that, or not Trump, but it doesn't have to be Trump, a strong president does work as a
buffer.
Yes, it makes these
You mean
other
peace- you mean
other
peace through
nations
strength?
think about. Yes, exactly. They're looking at us now, and they're saying this is the time to move. This is the time to bring unrest, and because Biden's not going to do anything.
Right. And part of that, too, relates to the financial thing, which ties into central bank digital currencies, because as we speak, it's what somebody said, there's a linear progression of things that are happening that will eventually result in the dollar not being the reserve currency of the world. That will be a very bad thing for us here in the United States.
That's happening now.
And one of the interviews I saw this morning, maybe it was one you sent me, Andy, where the person said, listen, this has been linear, and now it's exponential.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see, because of the weak Biden, you have Saudi Arabia joining in with China, China brokering a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the foreign ministers being exchanged, so they're normalizing things. And this has impacts on Israel, it has impacts on us, it has impacts on the financial system. And I'm just telling you, we could talk about this stuff for a very, very long time. So ultimately, we know that the Lord returns and cleans this thing up. But until then, the ark is Jesus. That's been identified for a couple thousand years, and we need to get right with the Lord.
On the ark.
That's never been more true than any time that I've been alive.
That's
absolutely
a great.
Get on the ark. Yeah.
That's the word to button up with. We've got about 30 seconds left.
Yeah.
And that's that's where we're heading, John. I appreciate so much that you came on the broadcast today. I had wanted to get you on sooner, but I had some things going on this winter with some health issues. I had a minor stroke. I was in and out of the hospital, so I wasn't sure how that was going to play into my radio schedule. That's why I put it off till I was pretty much out of the woods with a lot of stuff. Had 2 heart procedures back in.
Well, I appreciate
February.
you taking the time to speak to me today, Andy. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and be glad to do it in the future if the opportunity presents itself.
It will. God bless you. Thanks
and
for
they
joining
put those
in.
nanobots into Andy,
No,
so
no,
now
no,
he's
no.
doing great.
We gotta go. We're out of time. On that note, we are out of time. Praise God, everybody. God bless.
Thank you, John.
Watch Stand Fast.
Have a great Easter.
Be brave, be strong,
You
and let
too.
all that you do be done in love, beloved. Keep it right here on Faith FM. There's more coming up. Don't touch that dial.
Oh,